Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 11, where we will be covering Chapter 10, Social Psychology. As normal, I have your to-do list for the week. Let's start in on the learning objectives. Roughly, the chapter is kind of broken up into three parts, where we're going to be taking a look at influence, really. Social psychology is very much about influence in relationships and how we navigate our interpersonal relationships with one another, how we're affected by groups, and how we can be an effect on groups, as well as some of the negative sides of how we're affected by our culture and society and modes of thinking like prejudice and racism, discrimination, as well as altruistic behavior, which is a good thing. So we're going to be looking at a lot of concepts that are compact into this one chapter. And social psychology is actually one of the classes that we offer once you've taken intro psych. That's the only prereq to taking social psych. So if you're really interested in this chapter and you find that it resonates a lot, which I feel a lot of students do, please feel free to explore taking social psychology. I will actually be teaching it online this summer as well as in the fall. And it's my area of expertise, social and personality psychology. So it's a fun class. We do a lot in there, and it's a great class also for cross majors. So I get a lot of CJ students. I get a lot of education students, social work. So it's very applicable to a lot of different fields and a lot of different areas. So we're going to kick off the chapter by looking at factors that influence people as well as people together in groups, looking at what makes us conform to the behavior of others. In what situations would we want to go ahead and follow along with what other people are doing? What would be the driving forces behind that? Are there good reasons to conform? Are there situations when we conform and it isn't good? What is the impetus behind those actions? So, like, why would we want to conform to what other people are doing? What would we get out of it, or what would they get out of it? So we're going to be looking at this by means of compliance. So compliance is sort of going along with what somebody has asked of you. So usually we think of it in terms of a direct request. Someone's asking you to be a part of something, or to vote a certain way, or to buy a product. And what would influence us to do that? So we'll be looking at that. And then if we dive a little deeper, we start getting into the area of obedience. Now, obedience is obeying a direct command, and it usually comes from a place of authority. So there is, or I should say, there are different factors attached to why we would obey. Who's giving the orders? What's the context of the situation in which they're being given? What are the potential benefits or drawbacks if we don't obey, or if we do obey? So we'll be looking at some of the more sort of standout famous research in the area of social psychology, and that is by Stanley Milgram and Solomon Asch. Both looked at obedience and compliance to understand why we make the decisions we do, why we do what we do, and that we don't act in a bubble. Lots of things influence our attitudes and our opinions and our thoughts to the degree that sometimes we act in ways that are inconsistent with what we believe. Sometimes we do things because of peer pressure. Sometimes we do things because we want to get to a certain place. We have goals, or we have values, and acting in a certain way is going to benefit us or get us to reach those goals. So we'll be looking at all of those different factors that kind of play a role diving really deep into our attitudes about things and sort of how the mind works. So we're going to be getting a little bit into social cognition, like how do we think about our world? How do we place people and things into sort of categories in order to organize them in our head to make sense of the world? Some other fun sort of research embedded in that is impression formation, what goes into making a first impression, what do we know about first impressions, how long lasting are they, how do they affect us, and then we'll start going into looking at processes of attribution. Now, attribution is just deciding why someone acted the way that they did. What reasons do we attribute to others' behavior? That's attribution. We come up with all kinds of reasons for why we think people do what they do, but we come up with those because we're influenced by environmental variables. And here's where prejudice and discrimination can come into play. We likely hold prejudices against people, individuals, groups. Those come from places of stereotypical information or categorization or being in an in-group versus an out-group. And this can often lead to the behavior, which is discrimination, behind the prejudice. So, you have an attitude of prejudice and it shows itself in someone's actions, which is discrimination. We'll take a look at, what the research says about reducing prejudice. It is possible. There's been some headway in terms of things that we can implement in society, in education, in homes, in schools that would help to reduce the prejudices that we can often hold without really having strong, good reasons for doing so. We'll also take a little bit of a look at coping with stress. I think it kind of falls in line here because when you take social psych as a class, you talk about aggression, and we talk a lot about like type A personality, and just living in a stressful society sort of induces a little bit of aggression in people. So it gets into that a little bit, and then kind of turns the tables and looks at attraction and love and the theory behind love, what draws us to one another, what is sort of the guiding behavior behind who we pick as our mate, and how does that relate to how we were raised in our family of origin, and parenting styles and things like that. And then here is more on aggression, the biology behind it versus the environmental variables that contribute to aggression. And then to end the chapter, we'll be looking at altruism, otherwise known as prosocial behavior. When do we act in ways that actually help one another? Where does that helping come from? What kind of place does it hold for us? How are people being seen today in acts of altruistic behavior and motivations? And it kind of contrasts starkly with aggression. The two are pretty opposite. And we'll particularly look at altruism through some of the research on bystander effect. Why is it that when people see something happening and others are around to see it, we tend to help less? People don't want to get involved. Why is that? So we'll take a look at that. And then it wraps up looking at some interesting findings in the field of neuroscience, because we've learned a lot about how people's brains work when they're in social situations of pressure or stress, or not knowing what to do, conformity, obedience. We can look at brain imaging, and we can gain a sense of, what areas of the brain are most active when somebody is being aggressive, when somebody's showing love that's very altruistic and caring. What do we know about the brain? What's going on when we see those kinds of behaviors? So that's the chapter as a whole. I have your lecture slides here. And this week you'll be watching all the videos in episode 16, which is social psychology. Plus you're going to watch this extra video. And this is really essential because it ties into the discussion for the week. So the extra video is a modern day take on the original Milgram study done in the 60s. And it's very unique in that important differences were outlined in the recent study that enhanced Milgram's findings, added elements that he did not include, and begs to answer the question of, would people still act the way that they did in the Milgram study today? So you need to watch that. It is tied into your discussion for this week, which is Hawk 40, Obey at Any Cost. And that is the Milgram study. So I would recommend first reading the Hawk. I mean, you always want to read the chapter and the Hawk reading before you watch the videos. You want to have a good sense of what the material is about, and then go and watch the videos and watch the modern day Milgram study before you then try to go ahead and answer these questions. I will be looking to see if you're integrating in not only the video but the readings from Hawk and from Chapter 10, Social Psychology. You're not going to be able to achieve a 10 out of 10 on a discussion post if you're not showing me that you're integrating the material that you're reading in class. The material provides the basis for discussion. It gives you all the concepts that help explain what's going on in this reading, because you're going to read about the Milgram study, and there's going to be lots of variables and questions and things, such as the questions I've outlined here for you. For example, what factors were involved in the Milgram study that made people do what they did? The Milgram study was considered very cutting edge and slightly unethical for its time, and you'll notice that the modern day Milgram study doesn't quite take it as far as the original one did for various reasons, but people acted in ways that surprised not only themselves but the researchers that were doing the study. There were situational factors that sort of pushed them to do what they did, and there were dispositional factors, factors about the people, the person, that caused them to do what they did. And I want you to explain both to me, and you're not really going to be able to do that unless you're integrating in the readings, especially the chapter 10 from Cicerelli and White. That really helps outline what goes into obedience, because the Milgram study is a study on obedience, which is why it's named in the Hawk book, Obey at Any Cost, and it's got a question mark. Will people obey no matter what it costs them? Well, what do you mean, what it costs them? Are they paying? Well, not really with monetary means, but they're paying in terms of some emotional distress that they experienced during the study. And you'll find that people act in ways that go against what they believe and what they think they would do. So that's the first question. And then the second question asks you to say, how do you think people today would respond to the Milgram experiment? And here's where you're going to integrate the video. What was different? What did people do differently, or did they 50 years later when the modern day one was done? And then I'd like you to expand and describe an event that's happened within the last 10 years that mirrors the Milgram study. What's something that's happened where lots of people have obeyed and it cost them dearly? That mistakes maybe were made, bad decisions were made because somebody was following orders or doing what they were told, feeling that pressure of authority to obey. So you're going to need to dig a little bit here. You might get started with what's presented to you in the textbook, give some examples, but you could do a simple Google search that has something to do with Milgram and obedience and authority and current events, and see what you can come up with. I would love to see a wide range of things and not everyone regurgitating the same stuff. Okay, and then quiz 9 is all you have for the week, and that is it. Let me know if you have any questions.